more than you can imagine sometimes. It's really an honor for me to introduce our teacher today, Stephen Williams. Met Stephen when he came in for my class on Saturday night. Stephen has an MBA from Washington State. He has a master's in ministry from Northwest University. He's a writer, speaker, coach, and his book, hot off the press, about a month now, Autofocus Off, Adjust Your Perception in Spiritual Seeking, and Finally Find Yourself. Stephen Williams is our teacher today. Stephen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning. It is a real honor to be here, and I want to thank you both for the invitation. It's very generous of you to have me here. As Greg mentioned, I did publish my book about a month ago. It's called Autofocus Off. And if the subtitle sounds presumptuous, it's because of SEO marketing on Amazon. You have to say those things in your subtitle to be found. So. I'm not a big podium guy or a lecturing guy, so I will probably move around as I go.
Will you take the microphone with you?
I will probably not take the microphone with me, but I can project some Toastmasters. It won't be a problem.
Okay.
If you can't hear me at any point, just raise your hand and let me know you can't hear me.
What an expectation.
There's one in every crew, but not for this crew.
I'm getting that, yes. The silence is intentional. I'm a big believer in audience participation, so let me ask if any brave people want to engage by raising your hand if you want to, and let me know why you're here in this class. Not why you're here on this planet, why you're here in this class. Yes?
My name is Lillian, and I'm here in this class because I didn't know you and you're something new.
My name is Tina, and I'm here to learn all about spiritualism.
I'm Angela, for people who don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb and say karma.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm here because I come every Sunday. This is such a wonderful group of people. I learn something every single week. I look forward to it all week long, so that's why I'm here.
Excellent. So,
And
so
your
far.
book is great.
Oh, thank you.
That's what he's looking for.
I'll take you to Starbucks later. Okay, so this is the part where I come out from the podium. So we had some good answers. We had want to learn something new, wants to learn about spiritualism, which is new, but not a little narrower version of new. We had wants to learn about karma, which is a whole other talk. And then we had the I belong to the community and I enjoy the community and the company that provides. All of those things are what we would call an abstraction. Right? They're ideas. They don't actually exist the way that this exists. They're an idea. You have an idea of what the community is and what it represents. And that version of the community only exists in your head. The community exists as a group of people, but your version of it only exists in your head. The idea that there are new things to learn that would benefit you is an idea. And I'm not saying these things aren't true, by the way. I'm just saying that they're constructs that you've created. The idea that spiritualism is a thing that you should learn, or that you want to learn, is another abstraction. Karma is a very complicated one. I think Alan Watts got it right, and I won't go into that. That's a future talk. But all of these things are abstractions. Your self-identity, who you think you are, is an abstraction. It is not a real thing. And that's the fundamental teaching, I think, of, we've talked about, Angela and I, of Satori, is getting that. Yeah, she's wearing the Satori imports. So, a lot of people know or understand intellectually what I just said. You say, oh, well, sure, I mean, I understand that my family of origin was a behavioral system that I grew up in, and my relationship to my parents is sort of abstract. Okay, I get that. And I have a certain history, and I have memories, but I know those aren't really real, and the way I remember things happening might not be the way they actually happened. And so you know what I'm saying. That is not what the book is about. That is not what I think true spiritual practice is about. And this is just my opinion, obviously. But I think true spiritual practice is having the encounter with that fact. Right? It's sort of like the difference between saying, yeah, I know I'm going to die someday, and having a confrontation with your own mortality. Right? If anybody's ever been diagnosed with and or survived cancer, it's that moment of, oh, this is really happening. Versus the abstract notion of, oh, someday, sure, but until then, everything will be fine. I want to read you a couple of quotes to facilitate this. The first is a portion of a poem written by somebody who died in the trenches in France in World War I. His name was Trumbull Stickney, which is a great name. It's like a great pen name. Trumbull Stickney. The poem's title was Meaning's Edge. I look over meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of things you have not said. I look over meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of things you have not said. Your self-identity, everything that you think you know, all of your history and your memories and your emotions are built in your mind as a series of abstractions, sort of like a Lego house or building blocks. You start with very basic ones and then you build on top of them. The spiritual awakening comes when you see the building blocks. Not when you read a book and you go, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. It's when you get it. The example I use in the book, and since we have no children in here and we're all adults, I can use this one, is the act of sex, sexual intercourse. When you're a kid or when you're an adolescent, you, well, for the boys maybe more than the girls, but you fantasize a lot about it. Maybe you practiced on your own. Maybe you watched some movies or looked at some magazines. But none of that really got you ready or got you prepared for the actual thing, right? It's not the same. It's just not the same. And of course, you know that now because we're all on the other side of that. But as an adolescent, since you don't know what's coming because you've never experienced it, you project, well, it must be like this. And then you find out, oh, this is what it's like. So that encounter with the self as a series of abstractions is like that act of having sex the first time. It's, oh, it's not like I thought it was. And the meaning behind all that, of course, is trying to drive it to the question I opened with. Why are you here? You think it's good to learn something new. You think you want to learn about spirituality, or spiritualism, excuse me. You want to learn about karma, and you just love being part of the community. And again, none of those things are wrong. The point is that you have to experience those things as relatively real. Just like you are. Who you think you are, if I asked you, who are you? You would give me your name, where you're from, what you do for a living, who your parents were, if you had any siblings, or if you were raised by your grandparents, whatever, your family of origin, your behavioral system. And then you probably start to run out of things, and you go, oh, but I'm also a member of the church, and, or I'm a child of God, or I'm a starseed, or whatever. And all you're doing now is churning through these various abstractions of who you think you are. And you're trying to dig deeper and deeper, and the deeper you go, the broader and more complex these abstractions get. Right? You started out with a name, which is nothing. It's like book. Well, a book is an abstraction that you say, well, what do you mean by a book? Well, I mean, it's a collection of ideas printed on paper using words that form sentences and paragraphs and ideas. That's what a book is. But instead of saying, I read a collection of ideas printed on paper, blah, 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 I say, I read a book. So when I say, what's your name is the abstraction. And then the further I push you, the deeper and more complex these things go. Well, I was, in the beginning, God created things and there was darkness, and then he said, let there be light, and then 6 days later he created me, and then, hey, here I am. Or whatever version of that mythology you want to believe. Because all of that is mythology, and it's all an abstraction that we created to try to deal with the fact that we're here, and we don't even know who or what we are.
I was quiet for a little while, but I've had 2 major head injuries in my life, and through them I have multiple sclerosis on top of that. And through those injuries, I found out this ain't the first time that I'm here.
Okay.
Because there's several different lifetimes, and I accept that. And and it conflicted with the conventional religions that I was in, and I felt this is the closest thing to being in a group of people that are similar to me in thought, and that's why I'm here.
Okay.
And
So,
I've been here
good.
for a long, long time.
Hold on a second. Okay, so, and again, when I say mythology, I don't mean not true. When I say abstraction, I don't mean not true. These are words that describe your frame of reference. So, I'm glad you brought that up. Past lives theory.
Definitely.
Okay? I'm going to say something to shock you. I'm not trying to be rude. Who cares? Because as Ramdas said, you're here now.
Yeah.
So be here now, but you can't. Why? You read the book, don't answer. Why can't
We
you?
have history.
Huh?
Because we know we have history.
Who's we? You. Don't talk about everybody else, talk about you. So you have a history.
I know what happened before I got here. I know that I got up this morning and I had breakfast and
Okay, who did that?
Oh boy.
Okay, so you, this body and the mind that went with it, woke up this morning, had coffee, got dressed, whatever. Okay. So everything you're describing happened in the past.
Right. So that sometimes gets in the way of being present.
It doesn't just get in the way, it makes it impossible.
And you see your future
Oh,
through that.
Uh-oh.
You see
Digging a hole.
what is happening now. What is happening now through those filters.
well, who? Okay, you say it's not impossible? I disagree.
Guy
I
behind.
see.
Okay,
This guy.
because the person who's seeing these things is an abstraction that's built entirely on the past.
Second.
So as soon as you say, I, oh, too late.
Go on.
I got up. Who got up? I is a collection of memories, emotions, and family history, none of which are existing right now. Your mom and dad are not in this room, are they? I mean, maybe they are, but I know your mom isn't here. So my parents are not here. And the parents that I remember are not the parents. I remember some tiny fraction of what was actually happening as a child. I mean, my parents had whole other lives. They were having sex. Ugh. I didn't want to know anything about that, right? I just wanted the whole Oedipus thing, and we'd get into that. That's another lecture. That'll be the next book, by the way. The next book is going to be about constructing your own mythology. But
Oh, cool.
this book, as soon as you say I had a past life. Who had a past life? Ramana Maharshi. People would say, who was I in a previous life? And he'd say, who's asking?
Right.
Who's asking? I. Who's I? I is the collection of memories, emotions, and history.
Right.
So, you had a past life, and again, I'm not trying to be rude, I'm not trying to discount. When I say these things, I'm not saying they aren't real. I'm trying to relativize, and I don't think that's a real word, but I made it up. Relativize the ego. You have to have, if I didn't have an ego, I couldn't be up here. There would be nobody for Greg to text and say, hey, do you want to teach a class? Right? So, Alan Watts used to say this all the time. The ego, the point of awakening isn't to get rid of the ego, because you can't unless you go nuts. I mean, you can become stark raving mad. I guess that's one way to get rid of it. But his point wasn't to get rid of the ego. It was to see it for what it was, and then to continue living with that knowledge.
In the moment.
But, in the moment, isn't possible. Because as soon as you try to identify as the ego living, that's the
It's
past.
already happened.
It already happened.
Yeah, it already happened.
This was what Krishnamurti devoted his entire life to. He and David Bohm got into this when they started working together in the 70s. But that was the basic problem, was you can't be in the present. So Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, is a great book. Love the artwork. Clearly tripping on a whole bunch of different things when he
So
composed
we're
it.
always a minute in the past.
At least a nanosecond, it doesn't matter, because the whole point is the construction of the ego is based in the past.
And now it's past.
And again, and again. So the idea that you should be here now, which is the big spiritual thing, right? Everybody's telling you, be in the moment, live in the moment, live in the now. Which is like a great Tony Robbins, like, yeah, we're going to get everybody fired up, we're going to live in the now. And then you get like really excited for 5 minutes, and then you leave. And then real life comes back in. And I'm stuck in it again. Better buy another book. Maybe the next book will solve my problem. No, it won't, sorry. Even my next book, as good as it might be, won't solve that problem.
Modest.
What'd you say?
Modest. Great.
So, I look over meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of things you have not said. Let me combine that with a quote that I included in my book from a child's book. It was called You Will Go to the Moon. It was written in 1959, This was the dawn of the space age. They were kind of looking ahead to what humanity, was going to do in the future, as far as going to the moon. And so they had this idea of space tourism, and it was going to be a thing. And in the book, a child flies to the moon. My parents read it to me all the time. In the book is this quote. Sorry, let me set this up a little bit more. So the kid, space tourism, he goes to the moon, they land on the moon, he gets in a moon rover, which is like a car with these giant rubber wheels. And they're going from the landing station to the moon station, where they're going to live. A moon car does not turn away from a dish hole. Dish hole's a crater. It can go right down into the hole. Down, 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 then up, 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 and out. The purpose of this book, the purpose of this talk, the purpose, I think, of any legitimate spiritual practice is not to take you up. That is for you to decide. Nobody can tell you how to go up. All I can do is take you to the edge of going down. So my job, Terence McKenna, if you know who Terence McKenna was, he was an ethnobotanist who did a lot of research on psilocybin and ayahuasca. He even said, I was listening to one of his lectures earlier, his job was to take you right up to the edge and give you just a little push. So my job, and I think I would argue the job of any legitimate spiritual teacher, is not to give you the answers. Because how the hell would I know what the answer is for you, or for you, or for any of you? I'm not you. I don't have your family history. I don't have your biology. I don't have your brain chemistry. I have no idea how to take you up. I don't even know how to take you down, because again, that's all dependent on all that other stuff. My family history is going to depend, I'm going to process that psychologically in a certain way, because of the mom and dad that I had. You didn't have my mom and dad. You might have had a similar set of parents, but it wasn't the same. So my job, and the job of the book, is to take you right up to the edge. And I give you just a little push. And then you start to fall. And the falling is scary, because you start to see these things and experience them. You start to see yourself as a collection of ideas. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Steve.
Greg is awesome. You see the reality of these things. They stop being abstract concepts themselves. You start to experience them viscerally the way that you did the first time you had sex, or the first time, if you're a woman, you gave birth. The idea of giving birth and actually having birth, I imagine, I wouldn't know personally, is a big difference.
But isn't all the experiences that we've collected like that, though? First, you, like even driving a car, first you fantasized about driving the car, and you looked at your parents driving a car, but that didn't feel like driving a car.
Right. That's true. So, what do you take from that?
We're spirits having human experiences.
Okay. And do you see that's another abstraction?
Everything we have is an abstraction.
Yes.
That's the only thing we can relate to, and everybody's experience is different.
Okay. Yes. Back up one sentence, or half of that sentence. You said everything is experienced that way. Right?
Right.
Okay.
Unless you're repeating it.
Right.
So rinse and repeat.
All right, so that's a good point. And Greg had sent me something, he condensed an email I sent him and sent it back to me. So we live in a world of abstract images, that's basically what you're saying. And that's connected via subject-object relationships. So subject-object, so I'm not you. Every sentence begins with, usually the noun, I. I did something. Subject-object, and there's a verb in there. The linguistic pattern of all languages presupposes a separation between the subject and the object, and that the subject is having action on the object or vice versa. So I drove here, which means that I operated a vehicle that was separate from me. And we don't say, well, yeah, I mean, obviously you're not a car. Well, yes, that's true on one level. Did you want to say something?
Now, I was just wondering if you're talking about energy, that we are all energy.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Good. So, we're all the abstract images, everything in life, subject-object relationship, and noun-verb linguistic patterns. So, for the last 10,000 to 200,000 years, the evolution of the human species incorporated language. Right? We went from animal patterns of sound to a certain grunt meant a certain thing over there. And the instant that that happened, we created this problem of I'm over here, you're over there. Okay? So through that screen of I've created this really complex, sometimes confusing filter of abstractions, every one of us is interacting with the rest of the world through that screen. Because it starts with I, thinking that I'm a real thing. I think I'm teaching a class. And you'd say, well, who are you? And then I'd give you all the answers. You would give me family, history, name, blah, blah, blah. But that's not... It would be more accurate to say, instead of Stephen's teaching a class, you would say, teaching is happening. See, the focus is then taken off the subject-object of Stephen is teaching the class to teaching is happening. And in a statement, teaching is happening, there's no subject-object. There's only the action. Like when you say, it's raining, you say, well, what's raining? What is it that's raining? It's raining. What is it? What you mean? Oh, you mean rain is falling from the sky. Oh. I mean, because the sky isn't doing it. The sky's not up there, at least I don't think we all think that anymore. Ancient mythology might have incorporated, but nowadays we don't think of like a sky god floating up there in the clouds going, okay, it's time for rain. You know, like they prayed for the crops to have rain, so now I'm going to send rain.
Sacrifice a goat.
You hope it's a goat. You know, in certain cultures it wasn't a goat. The Aztecs, you know, bloodthirsty. So that's one of the problems, is the linguistic pattern is built on the series of abstractions. And again, the purpose of the book, the purpose of the spirituality, or spiritual method, is not to get rid of it, because you can't, unless you go crazy. And I'm not interested in going crazy yet, maybe someday, but for right now I'm enjoying sanity. I have a wife and 3 kids, and I enjoy being around them. So, for me, it's not useful to get rid of the abstraction that is me yet. But to see it as the abstraction is the entire point. And that's the pushing you over the edge, because then you fall, and then you see it, and then from there it's up to you what you do next. I have no idea. And people ask me, what's the book about? And I say, well, it's about you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of vague. Well, yeah, because I don't know what's going to happen when you read it. Some of you are going to read it, and you're going, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. Some of you are going to read it and go, oh, I already knew that, but you haven't processed it. You just, oh yeah, I read about that once. And so for you, it's still the abstraction. I mean, that's the irony of it, is that you're still locked in the abstraction, and you can't see that you are doing it. The moment you say, oh yeah, I knew that, knowledge is it. Knowing who you are is the problem. I know who I am.
It's the answer. It's not the problem, it's the answer. Knowing who you are is the answer.
Well, if you, yeah,
The
right.
problem is not knowing who you are.
What do you mean by that?
What
gotta
is
jump
what
off
you
that
are.
ledge.
So, say more about that.
So if you don't know who you are and you're always trying to reconnect, because perception is that we're separated, so when you try to reconnect, you look into who you are so that you can move forward.
So, who are you?
I am that I am.
Ah, see, that's a cop-out.
Part of the collective.
Perhaps that would be easier to then refine it and say what, maybe,
What do you mean?
instead of saying who, because that's still an individualized concept of
Right.
what,
Right.
instead of just being of something.
Right, so Ram Dass, he had a great thing. I'm going to totally rip it off. He had his channel selector. Do you guys ever see Ram Dass's or hear Ram Dass's lecture about the channel selector on the television? Right, brilliant. So he said channel 1 was physical. Male, female, tall, short, light skin, dark skin. Channel 2 was psychosocial stuff. Mother, father, provider, all that stuff. Channel 3 was astral plane, your sign, Gemini, Pisces, Sagittarius. And then channel 4 was that. It was the I am that I am. But, and this is, who's saying that? To be self-aware, or to be self-reflective consciousness, is looking at itself. Right? So to say, well, I know I am that I am, that's still the thing looking at itself. So where this takes you eventually, if you keep going with it, they call it, what was it? Reductio ad absurdum, right? You reduce the thing until it's absurd. If you take it as far as it can, what you end up with is nothing, because there's no answer. But that nothing is not really nothing. It feels like nothing, and it's terrifying, because what you've done is you've scraped everything away, all your ideas of who I am. And that's the falling. And so again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful or knocking. I'm just using that as the example of, to say I am that I am. Had you said it a different way, it would have resonated better with me, but because that's such a well-known thing, it's like...
It was never quoted right. It was never translated properly.
What was the proper translation?
The proper?
Yeah.
First of all, he didn't know who was talking to him, who said that. And therefore it's a duality right there.
Right.
But I believe what he was saying is, it is the, you know that I am everybody talks about? That part of you is communicating, downloading to you.
Okay.
That's the way I can say it.
So with all these screens, with all these abstractions, notions of who I think I am, and you can adopt all sorts of ideas. The further you go, the more complex the ideas become. And they try to masquerade themselves as being simple, but they're really complex. Because if I ask you, what does that mean I am that I am? You say, well, it gets really, you get into some pretty hairy theology and some... And again, so it's just the same pattern of it. It's trying to be the external thing answering, what am I? It's always the same movement of the thing looking out, going, what is it? It's the self. That's what self-reflective consciousness is. In the book, I use the example of mirrors. So in a lighthouse, right, there's one mirror, and there's the bright bulb, and the mirror spins around the bulb, and it's projecting the light out. Well, self-reflective consciousness is the opposite of that. There's two mirrors, and it's just bouncing back and forth. There can be a million mirrors, and the number of mirrors isn't important. The point is that self-reflective consciousness, which is what we're all using right now, takes an image, and then it bounces it, and looks at it. So when you have an idea of I am who I am, idea of that, whatever that idea is, it pops up, and then it bounces, and then your mind plays with it. That's what self-reflective consciousness is. It doesn't. So any idea that is playing in that is that movement of the abstract posing as, this is not a podium. This is a
Piece of wood.
No, it's not even that, because wood is an abstraction. Wood is a name that we call this.
Yeah, it's just the name we call it.
Electrons, protons, and...
But even that's an abstraction. Because that's not what it is. That's our name for it. See, things change so slowly that we think, oh, well, I can just call it, because, it's wood. And eventually it'll decompose, and it'll become protons and neutrons and electrons. Yeah, but what about that? Because we know that that's not the base layer. You go down to quarks, and you have quantum theory, which, the quantum physicists say if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't. Because they don't understand it. They've been spending their entire lives studying it. So this isn't a podium. This isn't wood. I'm not a person. A person is a really complex abstraction. The point is that all of the thoughts that you have, any thought that you have, by definition, is your mind abstracting something, forming an image of something, and then playing with it. And I'm not saying that's bad. We wouldn't have art if we didn't have that. We wouldn't have mythology. We wouldn't have dance and music and painting and sculpture. We also wouldn't have probably wars and thermonuclear warheads and North Korea and China and other people. I don't want to get political, but the point is that it's this double-edged sword of consciousness, right? Because what it does is it takes me out, and then I look at this separately. And it has to work that way. That's the whole point of self-reflective consciousness. And you have to see it in action to really get it. You can't say, oh, yeah, conceptually I understand, because conceptually it's just another abstraction. Like, I can explain to you what sex is, but that's not sex. Right?
Right.
I can explain, if somebody says, if I ate a really good meal, like I love Thai food, and if somebody asked me to describe my favorite dish, I'd be like, oh, well, it's got noodles, and there's vegetables, and it's got this really good coconut milk sauce, and it's kind of spicy. Okay, so those are all abstractions that are trying to create in your mind a mental image of what I'm experiencing.
But that won't fill your stomach.
And it's not the same experience.
Right.
Now, those of you who have done astral projection or out-of-body stuff like I have will find that, one, obviously language is completely, clunky.
It's all perception.
Well, language sucks.
Yes.
Right? Like, what's love? Oh, shit. Let me paint you a picture because I can't explain it in words, right? Because language is controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain, which sometimes talks to the right hemisphere, which is associated with images. But we don't really have the words because how can I put in your head what I feel? Dance, art, is a better way of doing it. But on the astral plane, right, if you've ever been out of body, you found that when you communicate, you're not using words because there's no body. You take like your picture, and you go whoop. So instead of using words to communicate, you just use the image itself, which is great because then you feel understood, but then you're still dealing with it. I'm separate. Because that's the whole point of it. So again, the whole point is to try to escape. Because I sometimes feel like we're all trying to escape that. We're trying to escape the ego. We're trying to get rid of it. Okay, bad news, you can't. But that's okay. Right? Another brilliant thing that Ram Dass used to say was he talked to his spook, Emmanuel. And Emmanuel said, well, you're in school. Why don't you try taking the curriculum? So I'm not saying it's bad to have an ego or to be human. I mean, we're doing it.